Welcome to the 35th probable episode of the Unifying Force. I'm Kat, joined by Gio and Dave. How is everybody?
I'm sad this weekend. I think you probably know and understand why. I want to start with rest in peace to Kevin Conroy. Is not a Star Wars person, but I don't think I'll get any arguments with like the most influential and person who's added the most to the Batman mythos, the main films or comics that you've seen, but I think the actor that's kind of added the most in the middle, in the in-betweens.
Yeah, Mark Hamill wrote a really nice tribute to him as well. That was quite good. But yeah, he like redefined Batman for a whole generation, for like multiple generations, like the last 30 years. Through the games, that even when you read the comics now, it's impossible not to think of Kevin Conroy when you're reading it. Even though you might love the on-screen Batmans, like the movie versions, it's like you can't help that the comics is like, no, that's Batman. Kevin Conroy is Batman.
Yeah, it is the definitive voice almost in your head. If you're reading any kind of Batman content, I think a lot of us would default to the Kevin Conroy
he was
voice
actually
that
the
you
first
hear.
actor to give the notion that Batman should have a slightly different voice than Bruce Wayne. Nobody done that before in the movies or the TV shows even.
Right, and I mean his transition, even his brief moment in live action to be old man kind of Batman Beyond style Batman in live action, so much of the gap filling in between the movies and the comics and everything is that's what Conroy did. And here's my segue. Here's my nice transition. We're going to talk today about a Star Wars property that filled in the gaps, that fills in some of the information we don't know between the animated series and the films, and that is Star Wars Tales of the Jedi. See what I did there? That was a segue.
Perfect segue. Yeah, Kevin Conroy.
Of a cartoon Segway vehicle riding across every time we say that.
Yes, that would be funny. We have the little right now. But Tales of the Jedi. I mean, I wanted more. It was just too short. It was too little. But what we got, I thought, was really effective and filled in a lot of the gaps in things we didn't know about Ahsoka, and way blew my mind about things that I didn't know, or things that were not in my headcanon about Dooku. Let's start with just initial impressions. Kat, what'd you think overall?
So far, I've just seen the Dooku episodes, but those were really good because it's like it's giving you a further impression of what the kind of things that they only hinted at in episode 2 in the Clone Wars, where he kind of pays lip service to the idea that he doesn't really trust the Jedi way anymore, and you just kind of have to see that through Qui-Gon's eyes. It's like, oh, Qui-Gon was his apprentice, and he thinks that Qui-Gon would have joined him. Well, you have to kind of go, up until now, you kind of have to go off of what Qui-Gon's opinions were of the Jedi and the Senate and all of that. unless you read all of the hordes of expanded universe material from, I'm not even sure all the sources. I remember reading the Wikipedia article of Dooku. It was like miles long. I don't know where all the information was sourced from. So it was actually nice actually seeing it in canon, that he actually does, have a problem with how corrupt the Senate is, how the Jedi are like the Senate's lapdogs, and how he kind of gets into Sidious's web in a way, or sort of like he's already there, but seeing him like delete Camino from the archives, and how they decided to say that, oh, he killed Yaddle. It's like, oh shit, it's like I didn't think there was a story behind her reason for not being on the council in episode 2. I thought it was just like, okay, so you have a new council member, whatever. But that was quite surprising.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Yeah, if you haven't watched Tales of the Jedi, you're in the wrong place right now, because the spoilers are gonna come.
Yeah.
Initial impressions?
Yeah, just broadly speaking, Tales of the Jedi, I think, is a absolutely beautiful love letter to the Clone Wars, the canon of the prequels, and so many of the themes that I think resonated with a lot of people in different ways around the two main characters and what they represented. The fact that you had 6 little treats, almost 3 on Ahsoka, 3 on Count Dooku, was fantastic, and I think it really whet the appetite for wanting more, because they were so fantastically constructed. You could even take a single episode and just sit with that and enjoy that as a standalone piece. The dialogue might not be so heavy. It's a shortened form in between 10 and 15 minutes between the 6 episodes, but you've got a lot there in terms of visual artistry to appreciate, the fantastic score, and of course the actual character stuff. And I think it's incredible when you think that Dave Filoni and his team managed to fit in incredible character work within this short form film style. And it's the kind of thing that you can imagine could be fantastic if maybe the team were given a longer form to show it.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. I mean, my initial impressions were, give us more. Make Tales of the Jedi like a regular recurring thing, and fill in little gaps on different characters that we want to know more about. I mean, they've left us still a lot. I want to know more about Ahsoka. They showed us the initial little bits there where she was, discovered, identified as a force wielding being. Is show us how she got from there to the temple. Dooku, there's still a lot of, if you've read a lot of the expanded universe in the EU, Dooku Jedi Lost, they could still go back and show us some of that, for those who don't read the novels, is show us some of his younger days and what brought him to being disillusioned with the Jedi and the Senate. Or choose completely separate characters, pull a character here that we wonder about what happened between this point and this point, pull that out, give us that. Anything.
They could also still expand on Dooku, because I was expecting, because they got 3 episodes there, that we would see something about his and Qui-Gon's friendship with Sifo-Dyas. And we didn't, because admittedly 2 of the Dooku episodes are one's a bit repetitive to the other, because there's 2 episodes about him having a problem with the Senate.
Right.
But I like that, because when they established that, okay, he already knows Sifo-Dyas at some point, I'm like, oh, maybe we'll get more on that. And then, well, maybe we could, because I think that with how popular this series was, it'll probably get another, set of anthology episodes at some point. But I think it also was high time that they finally got into Ahsoka's origins, because given how popular that character became almost immediately from August 2008 and her debut onwards, I'm like, wow, they waited a long time to really, because the only thing we really knew about her up until now from her origins was that Plo Koon was the one who brought her to the temple, and that she had like a special relationship with him. But they finally, got into that a bit more, which I was kind of like, because it felt like, especially after you see her character arc towards the end of Clone Wars going into Rebels, that a real missing piece of her story, which I felt needed to be there. Like, you don't really need that for, say, somebody like Obi-Wan, who is such a company man, like a standard run-of-the-mill Jedi. Up until Clone Wars, he becomes a much better Jedi. But
Yeah.
with Ahsoka, I felt it was more needed, and I think it's good that they finally did that.
Well,
Yeah.
you haven't seen this yet, and talking about the Ahsoka and the tying the things in, is they did go and give us a really critical kind of tie-in piece between Order 66 and where she is, the person she is in Star Wars Rebels, coming in as a fulcrum.
Yes.
So that's a really important tie-in piece. I think they kind of messed with, at least in my headcanon or what I had seen, the Ahsoka novel that I listened to as an audiobook voiced by Ashley Eckstein herself, which just makes it just like listening to the Clone Wars. But
Right.
they kind of very
did-
overly simplified that to tie in, but you still got
Yeah.
a lot of young stuff. Go ahead, Gio.
Yeah, no, I did hear that there were conversations between Dave Filoni and the creative team and the director and writer for that specific episode, the third part of the Ahsoka puzzle in the 3 stories you got in Tales of the Jedi, and how there was a potential sort of disconnect between some of the events that might have happened in the Ahsoka novel by E.K. Johnston, and how I think there were discussions in terms of wanting to honor it and tie it in, but the creative team decided that this is, and you can look at this as almost like an interpretation of what Ahsoka might have gone through in terms of just life events and character stuff. Not having read the Ahsoka or listened to the audio drama, for one, Ashley Eckstein narrating it, I think is a huge plus. But I liked the fact that there seemed to be at least some conversations happening behind the scenes in terms of acknowledging that there's already material out which is canon with the novels, as we know that Disney's original plan was to have everything as official canon from their acquisition onward. At least there was discussion behind the scenes between 2 completely different media, the novel and what we see as a visual animated short, rather than what we've heard and witnessed before our eyes behind some of the Star Wars films, definitely the sequel trilogy, and how lack of communication, strategy, and planning was a huge issue there. And again, it really emphasizes the fact that in Filoni we trust, really, and in how much he is willing to acknowledge the material that's out there officially, bring his own sensibilities to it. And crucially, I think it was in the Hollywood Reporter I read the story that he had discussed the Ahsoka, the more adult Ahsoka, between where we see her in Clone Wars and then Rebels, with George Lucas. He always had the kind of direction Ahsoka would go in mind, and to have somebody who's balancing the kind of Disney story in a novel that's canon with the creator George Lucas's original vision, and then blending that into a really enjoyable animated feature, I think shows that the character work that could happen with Ahsoka down the line could be in really good hands. Because as of yet, we're kind of sketchy in terms of huge details with the Ahsoka series, other than the timeline in which it will fit afterwards. But it was, in 2 senses, a sweet teaser of how great Ahsoka's character is for maybe people who weren't familiar with her extended travails through the Clone Wars series, and that entire timeline beforehand. But then also a great reminder of how interesting Ahsoka was as a character. And I think it was an incredible strategic choice to focus on Count Dooku and Ahsoka, going back to what Catherine was saying, in terms of really looking at interesting Jedi that break the mold in very different ways, but nonetheless not the kind of rote rank and file Jedi that just went in, stayed with the Order, and allowed themselves to just become soldiers within the Clone Wars. There's a lot more to it, and I think when you compare the way Count Dooku found his dissatisfaction with the Jedi in what we see in his Tales episodes, it's a fantastic juxtaposition to see and be reminded of Ahsoka's dissatisfaction. It's coming from very different angles, but the result was the same. Two very different personalities and characters, still actually walking away from the Jedi Order, but for very different reasons. And I think that's just great storytelling from a character kind of compelling level.
Well,
And it was,
I'm glad you brought this up and mentioned it. I didn't really think of, when I was watching Tales, the potential implications that this will have on the Ahsoka show. That didn't occur to me. I was enjoying it. I was watching it. I was had the audio drama in my head and was seeing how it related to that. But you're right. Is this has some major potential implications for what's coming? Is the Ahsoka show, you know, I mean, obviously with Rosario in it, it's going to tell us some of what's happening, and it's going to go forward. I think, you know, from her time in The Mandalorian, we're going to see, you know, the present time, her search for Thrawn. But are we going to see some flashbacks that will fill in some of the time between this Tales of the Jedi episode and where she is now? Easily we could. That may be why. I mean, a lot of people that I've heard and talked to have talked about, well, you know, the last episode of the Ahsoka ruined the thing for the audio drama. It took her out. She's doing something else. It made that not canon. But every bit of research that I've found that people are saying, no, that's still canon. What we had was like a simplification of those kind of events, or like another little story that was really similar to the story that we see in the novel. She's going by the same, you know, assumed name as Ashla, and she meets these other people, and she's trying to hide that she's a Jedi, but then she ultimately, you know, feels the need to reveal that. I don't think the little short animated series in Tales takes away from that. It's just, you know, with the audio drama, we got so much more of it, and they had this much room in the Tales format. But I think it's going to be great, and it's going to move in.
I think that's great. Exactly. I just want to say I'm so glad that you did say that in watching Tales Ahsoka episodes, you were kind of staying there in the moment, because I really felt that they were so immersive. And I'm conscious of talking about any more specific details for Catherine, having not seen them, spoilers. But just talking generally.
You can spoil it as much as you want.
Just the fact that I think you would have got the same flavor, I guess, from the Count Dooku episodes, just in terms of like the storytelling from a visual and audio point of view was fantastic. It was so immersive. You really felt like with each chapter of Tales of the Jedi, they were telling a story that could be entirely standalone, and somebody who's not familiar with the backstories or the little details outside of general Star Wars, or even Star Wars fully, there's some just really good story weights and story beats they hit on. And I think that is something I really appreciated. They could be standalone episodes, you know, in the same way that you get animated shorts that end up, you know, being produced and being a big part of film that doesn't always hit the mainstream. But, you know, there's always a category at the Emmys and at the Oscars, the Academy Awards, for Best Animated Feature, Best Animated Shorts. And I'm so glad that Star Wars has acknowledged this as a great avenue to tell more stories. But yeah, I think it stands testament to how good the Ahsoka storylines were, that you stayed in the moment and could enjoy them, you know, here for just the story that we were being presented with rather than looking forward. But I think that knowing Dave Filoni has this huge creative oversight for Ahsoka, because, you know, his character effectively, his and George's, it just bodes well for the future. Knock on wood, you hope that the live action stuff can really take some of the fantastic work that's done in animation, because I think animation can be overlooked. Often it can do if you don't have the access to it, or maybe you're not familiar with it in terms of just there are some stereotypes people have in terms of, oh, animated cartoon, not for me. It's definitely for kids, but there's a lot there that's telling a mature story, and we definitely see that with Count Dooku. Let's circle back to the Dooku episodes. They were telling a story that is a lot beyond a Saturday morning cartoon. Let's say that. I think we can look at the first episode and go from there to the planetary stuff with Qui-Gon.
I found it, admittedly, I found it a bit like, yeah, right. When the senator's kid's like, I'm going to fix all this. Like, yeah, sure you are. But I did love the fact that Qui-Gon steps in to stop Dooku. He's like, no, this is going to make it a lot worse than it already is. But you can see that Dooku's already, the fact that he's willing to cross that threshold means that he's probably done other things in the past so we haven't been privy to. And that was pretty kind of shocked because he shows up there and he's just immediately won over by it. Qui-Gon seemed to almost not quite indifferent. He seemed kind of bothered by it, but not like fully. But for Dooku to just like, okay, we're going to deal with this. We're going to free all. And the kid was just so calm and fine throughout the whole thing. I was like, okay, I like what Dooku's standing up for the right cause, but yeah, it's equally awesome that Qui-Gon stepped in when he did.
Well, and let's just say that they have pulled out, Disney Lucasfilm has pulled out no stops in making Tales of the Jedi. As short as it was, this could have been a throwaway kind of thing, but they've gone in and Liam Neeson back as the voice of Qui-Gon. You've got Liam Neeson's son as the voice of young Qui-Gon, which you can completely and totally hear. And they've gone back and gotten all the voice actors from the Clone Wars to repeat, and then bring in, spoilers, Yaddle, bring back one of their biggest directors from the Star Wars Disney TV shows in Bryce Dallas Howard as Yaddle. They did not mess with this. Yeah. This show is the reason. This is the little thing to tell everyone out there that says, well, I only watch the Star Wars movies. I only watch the TV shows. I only watch the live action. I don't watch that cartoon stuff. No, you need to be watching the cartoon stuff, because like we just said, with the extraordinarily Batman work of Kevin Conroy, how much it's added to that character in that story. That's what these Tales of the Jedi, that's what the Clone Wars, that's what Monday Night's Rebels Revisited is all about. How much Star Wars Rebels, Star Wars The Clone Wars, Star Wars Tales of the Jedi add to the vast universe. And they went full bore ahead with this and putting, I can't imagine what this cost to produce for how short it was, because of all those amazing voice actors, and they just made it. But
yeah, they pulled out all the stops for sure, and you could see that from the very first episode. I was almost blown away at how atmospheric and incredible, just visually, that in terms of the VFX they're using for the CG animation style, how it's come on leaps and bounds, and it still does. You see that in the lighting and the shaders they use, and it's incredible how much more complex and detailed just a visual world of these characters that we saw a lot of in the Clone Wars, and obviously Ahsoka originating there. Count Dooku had a huge influence in the films, if not the most screen time, as the Christopher Lee performance, which was a shame. But that's really why we love these extra moments that we get. And yeah, just exactly going back to your point, the budget must have been immense for this, but I think it really paid off, because there's so much in there in a short space of time they pack, with like the creative stuff, everything. And it's good to see continuity where you can, to allow things to match up well, in that you've got the same cast that you had in the Clone Wars. Corey Burton, Ashley Eckstein coming back, gives you that continuation, from just like the audio point of view, obviously, but knowing that they added a lot to their characters. And yeah, it's just a stunning example of how important voice work is, and the voice actors are. And I'm really glad that you've got established voice actors that are still being brought back for these big parts. But yeah, it is a nice surprise when they sprinkle in a bit of Liam Neeson right there, and then a little bit of Mane Richardson, his son, to bring something specific and a nice touch to giving us more Qui-Gon, even though they were Count Dooku-centric episodes. That's what fantastic use of time, just economically. In the couple of minutes they had in these shows, we get not just a lot from Count Dooku, but a lot from Qui-Gon. Even when he's off screen for that third episode of Count Dooku's story, The Sith Lords, which I think for many people might be the standout one, because you've got that entire Yaddle backstory filling in. Where did she go between films? Why did she vanish off the council? And now we have an answer. Did we need it? No. But did they justify it? Absolutely. And it fit in so well with what we'd expect to see from Count Dooku, knowing.
Well, and that leads us to a question that Spencer's wanted us to ask and explore on this. Is this little request here is so in this and in other things where it's adding to the character. So do we feel more from seeing the first episode that is Count Dooku more of a political idealist? Is he, really wanting what's best for the Republic?
Yeah, I think he's I think he's like Qui-Gon. He's more in tune with what the Jedi should be and is highly critical of what they've become. Like even he had a problem when he took Qui-Gon's claim of running into a Sith Lord seriously, and how the council just throws it down, and he's like, oh, so the council doesn't believe you, that kind of thing. Which is why I was surprised that when they brought that up, that Dooku, in that case, didn't just volunteer to go with him back to Naboo at that point, which seems like that would have made sense. Because if you're going to say that he's raising the point that he's concerned about it, then wouldn't he kind of go with him? But my favorite scene in all three of those is after Qui-Gon has died and Dooku's just standing at the tree, like holding court, if you will, and he just knows. And even Yaddle's like, yeah, it's like, I can't go there. My presence wouldn't be welcome there. But I'm like, oh man, this stuff is so good. But yeah, I think it's like he's an idealist. He definitely has an ideology that he wants to bring the Jedi back to what they should be, as opposed to what they are, kind of like Ahsoka, in what she becomes more like a true Jedi by the end of her character arc through Clone Wars. And sort of what Luke hems back to in The Last Jedi, getting back to, well, this is kind of what Jedis were at the end of that movie. And like, this is what Jedis were. They're not really supposed to be these dogmatic, political lapdogs, as it were. It's just that Dooku is frustrated enough from the systems that he's surrounded by that he's willing to resort to violence a lot faster than, say, somebody like Ahsoka would in that same type of scenario. As we saw that directly when she gets eventually expelled from the Jedi Order, she doesn't like turn violent against the people. She's like, fine, if that's the way you see it, I'm out of here. Whereas Dooku, he definitely goes like, violence is like the first thing he's going to do. So, well,
and that's the other thing that Spencer wants us to explore is, was his motivation really political idealism, or is he just like straight up murderer? Is he just, he's out there, he's outside the system, and he's just looking for an excuse, and I don't see that. I mean, yes, spoilers again, he ends up obviously being that way. He obviously just commits cold-blooded murder, and I'm thinking from the impressions we got in the Clone Wars, done it before, or has maybe not before, because the timeline gets he's done it again many times since, but go ahead.
Well, he's still an idealist, because even during the big Colosseum fight in Attack of the Clones, even though these Jedi, particularly Mace Windu, and those are the ones he's most frustrated by, because I like that he had his back and forth with Mace as well, being really frustrated. It's like, sometimes you're wise, but you let your rules get in the way of what's right. Well, he could have, in his rage, if he was all about killing, would have probably just killed him in that instance. Like, I'm done with you. But he didn't. He wanted to spare them and use them as political pawns. So he still has, even as a Sith Lord, he still has an ideology that he's striving for. Because I think he was, we could see in Revenge of the Sith that he was genuinely shocked when Palpatine told Anakin to kill him. Because that's not the direction he thought that was going to go.
Well, that's the thing that I
Yeah.
think a lot of really these Dooku episodes messed with my head, or messed with what my head canon was, in seeing how recently he had actually left the Jedi Order. I mean, when they talked about Dooku being a former Jedi in the prequel trilogy, I assumed that that was like a long ago and far away thing, and he'd been out on his own, or being, influenced by the dark side and being a Sith for a long time. No, I mean, they show him still in the temple when Qui-Gon dies, still in the temple recently, to, use Sifo Dyas's password to erase that information about Camino. Is he had not been so far removed from the order as what I would have imagined for him to get to that point that he was, imprisoning Obi-Wan and ordering the death of Jedi in the Colosseum. Is this
Mm.
was is a big, relatively new thing. I mean, granted, there are time jumps and stuff. We've been arguing that. I think we argued that on the watch along the other night. Was it, 5 years, 10 years? What occurred between there? But still a
Yeah.
lot more recent than what was in my head canon to make him that person. And when did he, Catherine was saying, why did he not just go back to Tatooine or
Naboo with
Naboo?
accompany Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan back there.
Yeah, why didn't he go back? Did
Yeah.
he know at that point? Because we see him talking to Darth Sidious about his apprentice,
Yeah.
talking about Maul. Did he know about Maul before Maul killed Qui-Gon?
Okay, now that you mentioned that, I do remember this. That means he probably did, but in which case, that begs the question: why did he let Qui-Gon? Maybe he was confident that Qui-Gon would kill him, and he wouldn't have to worry about it, because he did tell Sidious, "So you've gone too far, letting him kill Qui-Gon." And it's
Yeah.
like, well, I'm thinking, well, Dooku, what do you think was going to happen if they're going back there, and that that Maul is back there? And then, of course, there's going to be another confrontation. It's like, why do you think he attacked him on Tatooine? Not to say, hey, he attacked him trying to kill him. So, I mean, that's a little weird.
Yeah, it wasn't
is
like it was a welcome back for the Sith.
there's more
We're back
stuff
in the
to be
game.
told, even though it fills in
Yeah.
these little gaps. It makes you want to think, did he know? Did he, abandon, yes, he regretted.
Now that you've said that, though, he
warned
had to have known.
Qui-Gon, but did he knowingly let Qui-Gon walk into that trap? Was he that much of an idealist that he was willing to sacrifice his apprentice for that? Or did, like you said, he had the confidence in his apprentice that he would have defeated Maul? Did he think that would happen?
Well, yeah, because maybe he thinks that he could be Maul's replacement and be the new favorite. So it's like, ooh, I'll let my Qui-Gon will go back there and take care of it for me. I can't kill him because I'll get in trouble with Sidious. But if Qui-Gon does it and doesn't know about
Yeah.
it, then I could be the new favorite of Sidious.
Yeah, it's the little villainous machinations behind the scenes pulling strings, which is exactly what Palpatine did to the grandest scale galactically. But that's very possible. To one point, I would say, David, that the idea of I don't think Count Dooku would have wanted his apprentice to be. There was huge regret in Attack of the Clones when Count Dooku did mention to Obi-Wan how much he missed Qui-Gon. And so I think it's very clear from that we got in the films that Christopher Lee's Count Dooku did say, "I wish he were here right now. I could use his help," to Obi-Wan. And I think that really makes it clear that, yeah, while Count Dooku was definitely a political idealist, he still had that compassion that he wanted to bring Qui-Gon Jinn into the fold and follow him on his kind of reformation crusade of the Republic, which may not have gone the way that he exactly would have liked. But you do get the feeling.
Interject really quickly. How different would our previous episode, I don't remember the number, how different would our episode of what if Qui-Gon had lived, how different would that episode have been if Tails had come out before then?
I don't think Qui-Gon would be standing by Dooku's side because he already made it clear in that first Dooku episode that he's not even going to let him do something as small as kill the one senator. It's like, I'm not going to let you do this type of thing. Like, he even raced back to free the kid saying, you got to stop this and save your dad. So he's not going to accompany Dooku on all of the slaughter that he committed. Because I recently watched a video from the Stupendous Wave YouTube channel. They do a bunch of really neat deep dives on Star Wars, talking about just how many billions of people Dooku's responsible for killing through all of his separatist activities in the name of his idealism. And Qui-Gon would never, consent to doing any of that. So I think they probably would have come to blows at some point.
That's what I'm leading to is I don't think Qui-Gon would have gone the way of Dooku, but would Qui-Gon have been able to stop Dooku and bring Dooku back toward the gray Jedi and more towards his political idealism, as opposed to him going full Sith without Qui-Gon, with Qui-Gon's death?
After killing Yaddle, I don't think Dooku is going to come back across that line.
But again, that's after Qui-Gon died. Would that have
after he died? But it was also shown to be. It seemed to be almost like literally right after he died, because he's at the tree and Yaddle comes to consult with him, and then he walks away and she follows him. So it was like right then that happened. So if Qui-Gon had lived, came back, he doesn't go. But I think that around that time, he seems like he's already kind of made up his mind anyhow, because he knows, like, the fact that he's already aligned with the Sith at this point, he knows what that means and what that actually entails. And that's interesting. For a while, for the longest time, I thought that Dooku only joined Palpatine because, like, Dooku had his plan to fix the Republic. But then he found out what Sidious was doing and said, hey, your plan is actually a lot better, so I'm going to use you to topple the Republic. And then at some point he was probably going to get rid of Palpatine so that way he could lead things, and then it just kind of flipped on his face. But no, now we're seeing from the series that he was in league with Palpatine all the way back to episode 1. So yeah, I'm not sure if Qui-Gon would have been able to talk him off the edge or brought him back. Like, I know that with the whole Duel of the Fates thing, it does give a new definition to Duel of the Fates, because now not only is it a fight over Anakin, it's in a sense a fight over Dooku. Because what would Qui-Gon have said to him, or what would he have done? What steps would he have taken?
It's a little bit of Mandela effect or butterfly effect too. Is if Dooku hadn't been at the tree mourning Qui-Gon, then Yaddle wouldn't have observed him doing that. Yaddle wouldn't have followed him when he went to meet Sidious, and wouldn't have been there to be in the battle with him and get killed, all if he hadn't been standing at the tree mourning Qui-Gon.
And all the other Jedi were on Naboo for the funeral, and we're thinking about that, and that's why they didn't sense any danger of what was going on back on Coruscant, because the idea that there's Sith there is the last thing they would have thought of.
Yeah, and it's not as if that Count Dooku had it in mind to draw out Yaddle. I mean, he was confronted by her because she was onto him, and I think he very clearly took a stance and chose his side there. But I think that knowing what we know about Dooku in the episode on Justice with Mace Windu was really driving home what we'd seen with him on the initial the lack of hesitation towards killing straight away, which Qui-Gon was immediately opposing to. I think it was clear that when the time came for the episode The Sith Lord, where Count Dooku effectively, you could always argue who is the Sith Lord that we're talking about? It is Count Dooku at that point. He's very clearly a Sith. It's not the first time he's meeting Palpatine. It's definitely not the first time he's taken a life in cold blood. And yeah, of course, he might have had some hesitation. As we saw, there was a pause before striking that final blow against Yaddle. But he had already made his mind up in terms of affinity for one side of the Force versus the other, and also politically one version of a plan to change the Republic versus the preservationist kind of status quo that the Galactic Republic was up until that point. It wasn't as if that was his first murderous rodeo, killing Yaddle. He'd definitely done that a lot before.
I also love that, based on the timeline, like right after Sidious has this pivotal moment with his new apprentice, that he gets on the ship to go to greet Queen Amidala at the end of episode 1, and is already looking at Anakin. Oh, well, what's your career? The great interest after he just had a major breakthrough with his new apprentice.
Yeah, he's always thinking of replacement.
Sidious was always in. He was always in this to upgrade the apprentice every single chance he got. I mean,
Yeah.
he boom to this, boom to this, boom to this, to the point where he literally upgraded Anakin into this, mechanized powerhouse.
Yeah, see what you're saying there. Yeah.
I mean, he was no okay. Maul failed. Dooku, okay, yeah, Dooku, yeah, not so much. Anakin, take him out. Oh, now I got you. Oh, he's chopped up to bits. We can rebuild him. Hold on, you know.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. It does go back to something George Lucas had said in interviews when in kind of the press stuff before Revenge of the Sith released, in that when he talked about the villains and how it was kind of disposable villains up until that point, episode 1, Phantom Menace, Darth Maul out there. And then with episode 2, he had Count Dooku, very much come out on top in their duel, even though it was Anakin with Obi-Wan. He wanted to make a point to say that there were two very different tools that Sidious had at his disposal. We had the animalistic ferocity and power from Darth Maul that was, like raw anger and hatred, very kind of almost cliche villain, but also kind of cliche kind of bad guy Sith Lord,
like
versus, yeah, you could definitely take that view. And then you have Count Dooku, who is portrayed as a more dignified swordsman, a duelist, but then also had the political nous and nuance and the idea of reforming things. And he'd sort of said that he wanted to have those villains portray very different aspects of kind of dark side apprentices and Sith lords, but he saw that the fall of Anakin that he wanted to portray in Revenge of the Sith. Now, whether it came across strongly enough in the film or not is obviously up to how we took a read on that film. That Anakin as Darth Vader, he saw as a kind of culmination of the very strengths that were in Darth Maul in terms of the power and prowess, and then the wanting to absolutely change things with Count Dooku. Anakin had these aspirations of wanting to change the broken system, as he discussed with Padme in Attack of the Clones. He wasn't the kind of raw, just powerful, supposed chosen one who was going to be a tool for Sidious to pick up. Anakin had kind of the very big strengths of Darth Maul and the strengths that Sidious saw in Count Dooku, and kind of brought them together in one, which made him sequentially, at least in George Lucas's eyes, be the best apprentice that Sidious could find, and the one that he really would have wanted to have at his side beyond anything. So exactly, it does make sense what you're saying, the kind of upgrading. It's almost like Sidious, you could say, if he sees good things in the Darth Maul tool, good things in the Count Dooku tool, and then this Anakin, he's a multi-tool. He's got all those strengths.
Now, here's the thing that I don't want to discuss this a whole bunch, but I want to bring it up so we remember right now. Is you had talked about earlier in the week when we were talking about this episode, talking about Star Wars news and things going on. Let's think about this and what kind of a Sith there are and the different Sith tools. And I think this could be a whole episode that we might do in the future. Speculation on what we're going to see in the Acolyte, in what's going on with those Sith tools and the formation of what kind of Sith a person would be. So, we'll get that out there in the universe and let all of our viewers kind of ponder on that while we're pondering on it as well. And we'll circle back to that, I think, at some point. But let's keep talking about how these Tales episodes are filling in the gaps and things. We've talked a lot about it filling in on Dooku, a little bit about it's filling in with Ahsoka's character, but we've also mentioned the fact that it brings in a Yaddle story right there for us that we didn't know we needed, but we got. It's told us more about Qui-Gon a little bit, but let's talk about Mace Windu and what this has done. We clamor for a Windu series. At least I clamor to see more Samuel L. Jackson as Mace Windu. But the character, I forget the actor's name every time, who plays Windu in the Clone Wars, is back playing him in this. And let's talk a little bit more about how much more this builds into to his personality that I didn't expect. What do we think?
Well, he's very divided along the line. On the one hand, he's too obsessed with the rules and the regulations at the council, but is also morally conscious more than some of the others were. Like, he was sympathetic to the plight of the people on the in the second episode on that planet, even though he didn't condone the murder. And he says, "Oh, well, this Jedi Master, whatever, would have listened." And the guy's like, "Well, it wouldn't have made a difference because they're not gonna. So if they listen, they're not gonna change anything." And when they go back, and Dooku's talking to him about this, and he kind of gives him a backhanded like compliment / insult, saying, "Well, your morals, you're like your heart's in the right place, kind of thing, but your rules and your obsession with rules and everything really, knocks you down a few pegs, sort of, So it's kind of interesting that Mace Windu falls along that line, because on the one hand, he wasn't on the council yet, because Dooku even asked him, "Did you know you were going to get her council seat before we went to go investigate this?" And he's like, "No." And Dooku's obviously suspicious, because it's like, well, you say you kind of agree with them morally as to why they were upset, but now you're like, well, we have to do what the council says. Like, is that because you genuinely believe that, or because you were scrambling for the council seat yourself? Like, he's already looking at him and accusing him of being avaricious,
See, that's the level of development of Mace Windu's character that I think we got here. Because I did not believe in the slightest. Right. When he said, "Did you know before we went on this mission that you were going to get that council seat?" I think that I saw there that Mace was already really kind of playing the political game, and he knew. Anybody else?
Oh yeah, that
I can see.
Yeah, you can see that. I have to stop myself, and a lot of times I put into Mace Windu's character far more of other characters I've seen Samuel L. Jackson play than what we've actually seen information about Mace Windu. Okay,
is probably
I put into Mace
that.
Windu the path of the righteous man.
Yeah.
Yeah, he ain't on the path of the righteous man no more after this episode.
Yeah. Kind of justice by Jules.
Exactly.
You could see, yeah, I can see that. I think it was an interesting point to have that needle between Count Dooku and Mace Windu at the end of that episode. It's not like what was necessarily advertised, but it adds huge depth to Mace Windu as well, showing that there are many Jedi that have their own interpretations of the way things should be done. And they're not all agreeing with the council stuff, and they're not all on board with the way the Galactic Republic was ending up having Jedi, work and dish out justice in a particular way. Mace Windu was, in some sense, with Count Dooku in terms of resolving that conflict on that planet. But then, behind the scenes, potentially he was kind of within the inner circle of the Jedi Council, even having not been on the council up until that point. You can see why Count Dooku would have felt more disillusioned and more isolated from the Jedi from that point, which made me think, at least, that between the events of that second episode, Justice, where he found out that Mace Windu kind of betrayed him in a way by withholding that information, was a huge step towards Count Dooku's development into becoming. It's a shame it's not really mentioned at all, but he was then Darth Tyrannus. That was his Sith name. It's hardly ever. It's a pretty a pretty interesting name in terms of the background, that it's just never really used, which is a shame, because I think that there's a lot more to it than Count Dooku. The Dooku is from the Japanese for poison. That's what George Lucas wanted to have very clear if somebody looked into the background. So somebody who essentially was corrupted from within. The way poison works, it's something you have to ingest, not something that's kind of injected to you like a venom. And that was a key kind of philosophical thing he wanted to drop in there with Count Dooku. And we saw that, at least to my mind, by the events of the third Count Dooku episode. He was already the Sith Lord. And it almost felt that the last push away from the Jedi for good, ideologically, and also in terms of alignment with the Force, as well as the political background, was in that isolation and alienation that he felt from the Jedi, hearing that news from Mace Windu. I think that well could have been the the final step to push him over to joining Palpatine and becoming the Sith Lord.
I think I said this. I said this in the watch along on Tuesday. It was Tuesday. The watch along for this is the only thing that I missed that I think would have been super dramatic in this is if we had seen the bleeding of his saber, of his kyber crystal, and after he kills Yaddle, is see the saber turn red. If it had just stayed ignited a little bit longer on that backswing afterwards, and we just see it go from the blue to the red, maybe they've got another story, maybe they've got something else out there that why they didn't do it, or we've never actually physically seen what happens when they bleed a crystal. What maybe that we'll see that at some point. I mean, here's my point. I think there's even though we've gotten more, there's so much more to see. We could get another Tales of the Jedi easily. They could switch it up and give us a Tales of the Sith and give us some different, background on Plagueis or Sidious or, Maul. I mean, Maul's had so much more work, but been so much more of a character in animation than he has been or was in live action. We could get so much more.
I wish now that this bit with Mace Windu was written over 20 years ago, because the perfect comeback that Dooku could have given in episode 2 when Mace shouts to him, "We will not be hostages to be bartered, Dooku." He says the guy who bartered his soul for a seat on the council, because that would just be, and I would love to hear what Mace Windu's comeback for that would be, because it is kind of true, because it's implied that he, and even though he's not his apprentice, that they've been on a lot of missions together. You could tell there's a great rapport there. So he's kind of picked it up, because Dooku does genuinely admire Mace Windu for his moral until he sees this other side of him. So it's like, man, I wish they had written that a long time ago to bring that up.
Maybe our next Tales of the Jedi, everybody push. Next Tales of the Jedi is we want to see a Mace story. Tell us more about that. I still want to see a live action Mace story, and Sam Jackson says he's up for it. Let's do it before the man gets too old or before unwilling. But from Filoni, I know you're listening. Yeah, Filoni listens to the show. It's somebody who is listening who knows. Get this to Filoni and tell us. That's what we want. That's what the people want. Give it to us, because really this show, Tales of the Jedi, I think we've said, is what we all want, and then other things that we didn't even know that we wanted or needed, but it was out there and gave it to us. So I'm thinking that's about our time for the day. Final thoughts, wrap ups.
We need more of Tales of the Jedi, please.
Yeah. Please, sir, I want some more. They were fantastic, and I think it's awesome because on the one hand, we could have fantastic more development from established characters, but I think this format has really shown that you could give us animated shorts with new characters, with new Jedi. If we had more anthological stories of Tales of the Jedi, we could have filling in more backstory with what we got with Count Dooku and Ahsoka. We could have it with the other key players like Mace Windu, as you suggested, but we could have, unnamed Jedi that were, we could have a story of an apprentice, just the trials and tribulations within the Jedi Temple. And it doesn't have to be within the prequel era, but it could fit there if we want our cameos to happen. But I think it shows that the storytelling is so strong in such a constrained format that you could have this work at any era within Star Wars. So you could go way back and really expand the universe. I think my largest takeaway from Tales of the Jedi is it's clear that the EU of old, that the idea of expanding Star Wars beyond, and let's see what we get. But let's hope that we get more stories, and definitely at least another season.
And that's what I'm going to end with right there, is just what you started that with, and what Catherine says. Give us some more. We want more Tales of the Jedi. So I think that's the perfect place and way to wrap up. And so thanks everyone for joining us. and we will see you again on the next episode of the Unifying Force. If you want more Star Wars content, join the Rebels Revisited crew on Monday. They will be, going into another episode of Rebels and talking about that. I think it's a watch along episode. Tuesday night we'll be here for the virtual Cantina, and Thursday again rewatching more Star Wars content and doing the watch along of Andor. So until then, may the Force be with you.
Thanks. May the Force be with you all.